Hey everyone, hope you're doing well out there. Thought I'd talk a little bit about the new Isla S2400 sampler that I've got, and it kind of struck me getting to learn about it here. It reminds me of one of my other favorite samplers that I have. I've also been using quite a lot over the last 10 years, the Elektron Octatrack. A couple of reasons that really struck me right off the bat was that if you're used to working with 8 tracks on the Octatrack, you'll feel right at home on the Isla S2400 with the 8 tracks that are available here. And that's probably a little bit of a conscious thing on Elektron's part. We know that Elektron in their machine drum have an SP12 kit. The Elektron folks are willing to kind of look back to the past and borrow some of the good ideas from the past and kind of bring them forward. And that's of course what the Isla S2400 is also doing as well. The other kind of similarity that I see here is that both of these samplers are pretty unique in the market in the sense that if you talk about current offerings, so there's really nothing in the current market that really sounds or functions like the Octatrack, and I'd say that's true certainly for the Isla S2400. Of course, there is obviously a classic unit that the Isla borrows quite a lot, but they're pretty both, if in terms of things that are being produced and sold today, I think they're pretty unique, and both of them kind of reflect a vision that departs from the big manufacturers of musical instruments here. So I'm definitely kind of a sampler aficionado, and I got the Octatrack when it first came out, February 2011, and it was quite a revelation at that time. It came with this kind of old school manual that looks like it might even be printed on inkjet paper or something, or inkjet printer. It definitely looks like a prototype manual. And it came with some fun promotional brochures. I don't know if they're still doing that now, but this was part of the package back in 2011. Well, so what are some of the kind of the key differences here, and what are some of the things that are different here? I thought that would make a good topic for a video. So as you can see, the Octatrack is maybe, I don't know, in terms of I'm not really good with cubic feet or cubic volumes or cubic meters, but I'd say it's definitely nowhere near the volume of the Isla S2400. Maybe half the volume or 1/3 the volume. I'm not good with my powers of 3 stuff, but it's definitely a lot smaller. I'm willing to bet that the Isla is about 4 times as heavy as well. It's got these big, thick sides. It's very heavy, and so I think one of the nice things about the Isla is that once you're done making some music, you could just pick it right up and go break down some doors with your local fire department, rescue some people who are, in danger. A couple of good cracks on a door with this sampler, the door is going to have to throw in the towel. So I guess that's kind of an unintended use, but it's probably would be doable if you were willing to risk the integrity of the unit for doing some fire safety. Some of the things that are kind of different about these is that the I/O for the Octatrack has always been something that people have a little bit wish they had some more. It's only got 4 outputs and 4 inputs, and that's a little bit hard to deal with when on an 8-track Octatrack, and it's something that I think a lot of people would like to have seen more tracks or more outputs, input outputs. On the Isla, it's got a whopping 8 outputs and a whopping 8 inputs, if I recall correctly. Octatrack users would envy, I think most of us anyways. Another thing that the Isla has going for it is SD cards versus compact flash on the Octatrack, and the SD card on the Isla is rated up to 256 or 512 gigabytes, whereas the Octatrack, I think they've only got it going up to 64. Not a huge deal for me because I don't feel the need to browse through terabytes of samples, but that might be a nice thing for somebody who does like to do that kind of thing. Here's another thing that I really like about the Isla is these velocity sensitive pads. Definitely it's kind of fun for getting a kind of something a little bit more dynamic or kind of organic sound as opposed to just punching in step sequencing things like you would do on the Octatrack. Certainly the Octatrack gets the job done, of course, but there is something about having those velocity sensitive pads here. The Isla has 4 banks, and when you toggle through them you have 8 samples per bank. So you've got a total of 32 samples per pattern available as far as I can tell. Again, I'm not a real seasoned user on this. For the Octatrack, I think potentially you could have up to all 128 samples that's available to you at any given point in a pattern by doing kind of P-locks and stuff like that. And if you have something in a flex, if you have a mix of flex and static machines, you could maybe do up to 256 different samples in one pattern, potentially. I don't know if I'd ever really do that myself, but it does have a little bit more flexibility on the Octatrack side. I love the crossfader on the Octatrack, and so the Isla is even better. It's got 8 faders. These faders mostly do kind of what you'd expect in terms of repitching and levels and a few other things, but it does get used for some of the other functions like setting up envelopes. As far as I can tell, again, I'm not a power user of the Isla yet. But if you like the crossfader on the Octatrack, you might really like having 8 faders on the Isla. The Octatrack has a lot of assignability. You can route that to different effects and stuff. The firmware for the Isla is still kind of in active development, so it may be that kind of stuff is coming as well. We'll find out. Track mutes and solos. I think the Isla kind of wins here. You got dedicated buttons for your track mutes and solos. You can do a very quick motion to do that same kind of stuff in the Octatrack, but it does require an extra button push or 2. So I think the Octatrack maybe loses by a hair on that. It's certainly not a deal breaker for me either way, but it is this is kind of a nice thing to have. And I imagine if you're in a dark room, the nice thing about this is it's kind of lit up, and you don't really have to kind of muscle memory. You don't have to rely as much on muscle memory there. One thing I do like about the Isla is you can do there's different kinds of if you want to repitch your samples, you can go into multi-mode and do pitch, and you can set up different kinds of scales over here with 8 variations or 8 different pitches. So this is really nice for things like bass lines where you may not really have tons and tons of chromatic things. And if you're a bass player like I am, you know you're going to pretty much stick to your pentatonic scale in a lot of cases and then maybe throw in a few extras. So that's going to give you those 8 notes right there. Of course, potentially you could set up multiple scales and kind of recycle those scales and like do different kinds of recordings with different kinds of pitch setups. Maybe I haven't seen it yet, or maybe it's coming, but I know that Isla produces a chord bot, so it might be nice to see different kinds of user scales that you could pull up quickly. Like for example, this is a minor pentatonic scale, or you know, all these other kinds of scales that I think the music theory folks are certainly all aware of. I know there is some kind of setups for different kinds of modes in the pitch slider with the setup, but the difference is with the Octatrack is that you don't necessarily have that. You just have a chromatic keyboard, and that has some pluses and minuses as well. Of course, you can play things chromatically. The downside of the Octatrack is that you've got pretty much 1.5 octaves per page, and if you want to jump back and forth, you'll have to kind of change screens, so it's a little bit less fluid than having all these values right here. But it's almost kind of a matter of preference. But I do think this is kind of nice, especially for certain kinds of parts like bass parts. Song modes, they both have song modes. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not a huge song mode user, so I'm not going to really comment too much on that. I know some people really like song mode. That's not my thing, but you know, they're both available. We touched a little bit on envelopes. Envelopes on the S2400 are pretty much insane. I think they've got attack, hold, semi-attack, something. I certainly don't get all that kind of mileage in anything that I put together, but for people who need a lot of envelopes, boy, you'll get it here compared to the Octatrack. Slices on the S2400, I believe it's at 8 slices per sample, and on the Octatrack it's 64, so there's a little bit of a difference there, and I think that speaks to the Octatrack as being a little bit more specialized into kind of fine-grained manipulation of samples, whereas the S2400, at least in the current firmware, is a little bit more about just getting going with what you have, as opposed to maybe doing tons and tons of super edited sample stuff. Time stretching on the Octatrack, you know, that's not exactly the, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think the time stretching on the Octatrack is necessarily my dream come true. It's there, I use it from time to time. It doesn't always sound like the way I'd want it to, but it does have that on the Octatrack. As far as I know, it's not on the S2400 yet. Again, the firmware may change, who knows. The effects, that's where I think the Octatrack really has a lot of effects right now. And again, it's still early in the firmware over here. But I think the Octatrack's effects are actually, some of them are pretty good. I actually think that the Octatrack's filters are really not that bad. They're very workable. You've got 12 dB per octave. You got 24 dB per octave. You've got a filter drive, which is kind of an unsung hero of the filter section on the Octatrack, if you ask me. The filter here on the S2400, I believe, they've got plans for an analog filter. And I believe right now it's a digital filter on here with the low pass, band pass, and high pass. I could be wrong about that. I definitely could be wrong about that. And feel free to correct me in the comments if you like. So I'm just learning this myself. I do like the dedicated control of mix out versus phones here. I think that's a nice touch on the S2400. You do not have a separate control for that on the Octatrack. External MIDI sequencing on the Octatrack is pretty good at it. I think right now, I understand it's not really quite there yet. And again, that might be something that's coming. But if that's something that's really important, I think the Octatrack is still kind of well known for that capability. So those are just kind of a few of the features. Again, I'm not going to say I'm a totally knowledgeable person about the S2400, and frankly, maybe not even of the Octatrack. I don't use all of its features. There's a lot of things I don't even have any experience with on the Octatrack, despite owning it since February 2011. I do not use the looping stuff at all. The live looping, never used it, never will use it. It's just not part of my workflow, and so on. There's probably a lot of other things that I haven't used on the Octatrack, to be honest, because it is pretty deep. I don't use it as like a DJ rig where I've got lots of things going on at the same time and I'm kind of cutting things up on the fly. I tend to record things and then put them in, or record them straight in, as opposed to kind of doing a live multitasking thing. And I thought I'd zoom in here and just show step sequencing really quickly. So that is possible on the S2400. There is a step sequencing mode here, and there's also a TR mode, which is pretty closely related to this, but maybe another time. So here's you got your grid of note events, and in this case we can either take this encoder and go through. In this case I've got I believe 16 sets of events over here and 16 sets of events over here, and you can kind of keep stringing these out and get more and more. There's also a left and right button you can go. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. It definitely gives me an incentive to keep producing some more videos about these machines, and hope you're staying safe out there. Enjoy your musical time on the planet. Take care.